Well, Bungie was back this week with another bumper TWAB, detailing big changes coming to Destiny 2, plus we've got a mid-season weapons balance patch to look forward to with plenty of changes coming to the weapons. Well, today I'm going to go through all of that detail, so without further delay, let's get to it. Well, if you're new around here or find this useful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below for all the latest Destiny 2 content, and turn on notifications by hitting that bell, and roughly 98% of viewers who watch This Week in Video Games aren't subscribed. So subscribe today and never miss an update. I'm going to dive right over to This Week at Bungie and go over to Mercules. And Mercules says, "Hello everyone, Mercules here. We have a lot to talk about in this mid-season patch from a weapon standpoint, so let's dive right in. One note before we get started: when we say ease of use, we usually mean one or a combination of the following things: so stability, aim assist, recoil direction, body shot time to kill, or optimal time to kill crit percentage, i.e. requiring a weapon that requires 100% critical shots to achieve optimal TTK is lower ease of use, and a weapon requiring 50% critical shot to get an optimal is higher ease of use. We've seen this question get asked a lot and wanted to address it up front so that in the future you have a better idea of where we're looking at and what we say to address the ease of use for certain weapons of balancing purposes. Okay, so let's have a look at the weapon archetypes first. So auto rifles. Auto rifles see a strong usage in most PvP activities, around 25%, but that drops to around 13% in endgame PvP. So that's Trials of Osiris. We often hear suggestions that we should decrease the TTK or increase the range of auto rifles, but we've investigated those options and found, with very minor changes to either, they can quickly become oppressive across PvP sandboxes. As it stands, several high impacts at 360 RPM and precision frame 450 RPM auto rifles are already capable of outranging hand cannons, and at least one adaptive frame can as well. We do not want them to wholeheartedly be competing with pulse rifles in the 40 meter plus ranges. In addition, even a single bullet reduction in TTK places many auto rifle subfamilies into the best-in-class lethality. As such, we've decided to lean more heavily into increasing their ease of use and making them feel better to shoot within their optimal ranges, with a substantial buff to stability. Although the change is only to the high end of the stat curve, the changes affects all stat values above 0, with increasing effects as you get into the higher stat values. So, with the precision frame auto rifles specifically languishing since Uriel's gift meta of early Destiny 2, and because they are inherently so stable, they did not benefit much from the change outlined above. As such, we have slightly brought their critical hit multiplier up to increase their critical hit damage, which, combined with the body shot damage buff from last season, puts them in a much stronger position without directly lowering the optimal TTK. So in general, increase the effects of the stability stat and recoil reduction by about 20% at the high end, and with the precision frames, increase the crit damage multiplier from 1.5x to 1.55x, and crit damage goes from 30 to 31. Next up, we've got bows. So as mentioned in a previous TWAB, we wanted to reduce the effectiveness of max speed bow swapping as a strategy, as it is functionally fast enough that it's near impossible to counter in high level gameplay. The below change is not massive, but it should move the total time for a bow swap kill to be closer to other primary weapons' optimal TTK, giving players a better opportunity to fight back against it. So they've increased the bow stow duration, that varies by subfamily and handling stat. So before 0 to 100 handling stat, lightweight frame 0.4 seconds to 0.2 seconds, precision frame 0.43 seconds to 0.2 seconds, and then after 0 to 100 handling stat, so lightweight 0.45 seconds to 0.3 seconds, and precision 0.48 seconds to 0.33 seconds. Well, next up we've got pulse rifles. So pulse rifles are strong in the current sandbox, both due to the reduced dominance of other mid to long range weapons and the availability of multiple easily acquirable or craftable strong options. In addition, a few balanced passes back, we buff the range a moderate amount, but in the current sandbox, we no longer feel that they need help across the board. As such, we've removed the range bonus at the low end while retaining it at the high end to continue rewarding those who spec into range without giving the same advantage to those who do not. So we also felt there was not enough difference in the feel of a weapon handling across pulse rifle subfamilies, so we've rebalanced the stat to decrease the effects slightly at the low end and raise them at the high end. So with adaptive frame, that's 390 RPM pulse rifles, they've not been favoured since the bygone era, and we believe this will change enough to increase their strength relative to other pulse rifles without pushing them too far into the meta territory. As for the rapid-fire frames of the 540 RPM pulse rifles, Peace of Mind has an out-of-band stat that allows it to compete at longer ranges that would be expected for the subfamily, so it'll be the first of multiple zoom outliers we'll be looking at bringing in line over the next season. So in general, rebalance the effect of handling stat across pulse rifles. The handling stat affects the weapon's ready, stow and aim down sight speed. Increase the effects of handling by 5% at the high end, mostly affects the lightweight and adaptive frame pulse rifles. Reduced effects of handling by 2% at the low end, mostly affects high impact and rapid fire pulse rifles. And adjusted the damage fall off scale based on the range stat. So at 0 range, reduced it from 16 to 15 meters, and 100 range, that is unchanged. With the adaptive frame pulse rifles, increase the precision multiplier from 1.6x to 1.65x, and crit damage goes from 30.4 to 31.4, and that allows the weapon to kill guardians below tier 4 resilience with 6 crits, that's 2 bursts, in 0.60 seconds, and with the rapid fire frame pulse rifles Peace of Mind base zoom reduced from 19 to 18. Next up, we've got scout rifles. So when we buffed high impact, so that's 150 RPM scout rifles last season, the main goal was to get them up off the floor by reducing how punishing hitting body shots was. We overbuffed them a little bit, going so far as to make the optimal TTK more forgiving against low resilience as well. This has made them slightly too easy to use for a weapon with functionality with unlimited range, and the below change to damage will take their optimal TTK back to requiring 3 crits across all resilience values, whilst retaining the change to body shot TTK from the previous balance pass. So with high impact scout rifles, reduce the body damage from 42 to 40, and the crit damage from 73.5 to 70. Next up, we've got sidearms. So interestingly, sidearms have long had substantially less auto-aim range compared to damage range, a decision made many moons ago. With the removal of the auto-aim fall-off bonus from rangefinder, we felt that sidearms in general seemed lacking in the about 15 meters engagement distances, particularly on mouse and keyboard. As such, this change should bring them up to near parity with other weapons. So for comparison's sake, sidearms with rangefinder should feel about the same after this change as they do in the game now, but sidearms without rangefinder should feel notably better. So increase the auto-aim fall-off distance by 30% across the board. Next up, we've got submachine guns, so we wanted to be very careful about touching submachine guns, as we believe that most of them are in a good place with their intended ranges. However, in-game and in playtests, it has become apparent that some SMGs can be used well outside of their distance effectively, and it has made it difficult for other weapons to compete. So we've addressed a couple of outliers individually, but also have made a change to rein in how strong SMGs are once damage fall-off begins. As mentioned above, some outliers in the precision frames, that's 600 RPM subfamily of SMGs, have outband zoom values to the point that they can overstep the effective ranges of some auto rifles. These outliers have made it difficult to justify tuning precision frames overall, so at the same time, their 0.8 seconds optimal TTK makes them weak options against other SMGs, forcing them to rely on their high effective range and their damage boosting perks in order to compete. So, lightweight frame SMGs currently overlap too much with adaptive frames, so we're making a very small change to help differentiate them. So in general, reduce damage fall off end, the distance at which the damage dealt by the weapon hip fire reaches its lowest point. Aiming down sights extends this distance by a factor of the zoom from 24 meters to 23 meters across the board. With precision frame SMGs, increase the base damage from 16 to 17, and the crit damage goes from 22.4 to 23.8. And reduce the Azuma Shara's Wrath and Shira's Wrath Adept and Friction Fire from 16 to 15, and with the lightweight SMGs, reduce the base damage from 11 to 10.85, crit damage from 18.2 to 17.9. Next up, we've got fusion rifles. So precision frame fusion rifles has seen an uptick in usage since we buffed them to allow them to kill in 5 bolts, and they're sucking the air out of the room for the other subfamilies due to their extremely high ease of use. And the below change should make it slightly harder for players to maintain perfect vertical recoil without any additional manual control of the bolt spread. So reduce the effect on the intrinsic precision frame perk has on recoil direction by 50%. Well, next up we've got glaives. So glaives have been difficult to counter when they've got shield energy, but this change should address that, so we're going to continue to keep an eye on glaive shield damage resistance in the future, especially when their improved hit registration changes come into effect in Season 19. So reduce the glaive shield damage resistance versus players from 75% to 50%, and damage from player supers unchanged at 50%, and damage from non-players unchanged at 97.5%. Next up, we've got sniper rifles, so we've made several changes trying to make challenging a sniper rifle more feasible over the years, but ultimately the way flinch works made this tricky to do in a way that didn't make him feel worse to use, particularly in PvE. Under the hood, incoming damage causes players' aim to deflect by an angle dependent on the weapon type and damage amount. There's also a spring force that pulls aim back down. You know, for spring nerds out there, that's defined as dampening ratio and spring force, and often is called a settle time. We've made a change in Season 19 that has significantly moved the needle in internal playtests. We've reduced the amount of flinch received in PvE to avoid adversely affecting the experience, but increase that settle time substantially. This means you're going to continue to flinch away from your target without settling enough to shoot through the flinch, and our goal is to discourage to continue attempting a snipe when you're already under fire. You know, the experience of sniping while not under fire won't change. So in general, increase the settle time after receiving flinch by 60%, and reduce the received flinch in PvE, and now that this is sufficient playtest time, we're making a similar change to linear fusion rifles in Season 19. Well, next up we've got trace rifles. So like auto rifles, trace rifles have not been popular at high levels of play outside some particularly niche builds. You know, when we investigated ways to improve their performance, we found that a small increase in damage had a dramatic and negative effect in terms of how it felt to play against them. And imagine being consistently being killed by an out of bounds with Rampage at 30 to 35 meters, and their range is quite respectable on its own. Indeed, what we found is that the lack of stability made it difficult for most trace rifles to be used at the farthest points of their intended engagement ranges, because it was difficult to sustain the precision fire on moving targets. So we've increased their stability by an even larger amount than we did with auto rifles. So at high stability stats, this should make trace rifles feel much more like laser beams and less like recoiling Ghostbusters proton packs. So in general, increase the effective stability stat has on the recoil reduction at the low ends of the stat by about 10%, and at the high end of the stat by about 25%. Finally, in the weapons, we've got rocket launchers. So although rocket launchers see passable usage in PvP, they lag far behind other heavy weapons like linear fusion rifles and heavy grenade launchers in effectiveness, due in large part to their inability to get multiple kills per magazine without targets being grouped closely together. With an increase to blast radius, this should make it notably easier to net kills on targets that are not right next to each other or to the centre of the blast. So increase the blast radius by 0.4 meters across the board. Well, next up we've got changes to perks. So first of all, we've got Gunshot Straight. We had multiple reports of the audio was triggering frequently enough to be annoying, so we've removed the audio cue from activation. Next up, Rangefinder. Rangefinder has long been one of the flat-out strongest perks in the game across multiple archetypes of weapons, due to how effective zoom is at improving the multiple aspects of the weapon performance, combined with the fact it is a neutral activator. You know, it doesn't require getting a kill or dealing damage to activate. The bonus of increasing auto-aim fall-off distance by 20% puts this perk into a league of its own in terms of power, as it massively increases the ease of use of a certain weapon type, well beyond the increased engagement range provided by the zoom, and makes it difficult for any other perk to compete with it without substantial power creep. As such, we've made the decision to retain the zoom bonus, but remove the auto-aim fall-off bonus, and we expect the perk to remain a top choice, but it's going to be less dominant compared to other options. So they've removed the additional 20% bonus on aim assist fall-off. Next up, we've got changes to exotic weapons. So first of all, Jade Rabbit. Jade Rabbit has a unique stat package compared to almost all other high-impact scout rifles in the game, and has massively high aim assist and stability. The aim assist puts the weapon's ease of use well above what we find to be acceptable for a weapon with near unlimited range and fast optimal TTK. So now that the high-impact scout rifles are performing comparatively better than they had been in the past, the time has come to bring Jade Rabbit more in line with the upper end of other scout rifles in its subfamily. So reduce the aim assist by 20. Next up we have the Lord of Wolves. So when we nerfed Lord of Wolves for PvP, we mentioned that was the first part of a larger rework we were planning for the weapon, aimed at making it more competitive on the PvE content. Right now, the Release the Wolves perk reduces the accuracy by a substantial amount, with the intention that it would be used against small targets, but it still lands shots on larger targets. The increased spread meant that it was difficult to land crits even on a large target without having to be dangerously close to them. So in content where damage matters, this could often be a lethal experience, so we've reduced the accuracy penalty by 70%, so it should still be inaccurate enough to use the Release the Wolves in PvP against Guardians. That's not going to be so effective, but it's going to make it easier to consistently hit critical hits on big targets in PvE without the need to be right next to them. Well, next up, we've got No Time to Explain. So this gun has been dominant in PvP for so much of last season, topping the trials usage and the kill charts week in, week out. However, we have to be careful when tuning this weapon because its dominance is not universal. This weapon sees over twice the usage and dramatically higher effectiveness on mouse and keyboard than it does on controller. For example, on mouse and keyboard, No Time to Explain makes up 29.9% of all pulse rifle usage in PvP, and that accounts for 31.1% of pulse rifle kills. On controller, No Time to Explain is 12.3% of pulse rifle usage and only 12.5% of pulse rifle kills. That is more than double. With mouse and keyboard having higher stability, accuracy and auto-aim, two bursts from No Time to Explain are much easier to achieve in that sandbox, so we needed to tune it in a way that the difference was not noticeable on mouse and keyboard, but it did not ruin gun feel for controller players. At the same time, we wanted skilled players to continue to be able to use the weapon effectively, whilst lowering their overall ease of use to make it more difficult to perform well with the weapon. We tested several changes and decided on a significant reduction to the recoil direction stat, which spreads out the burst pattern a noticeable but not uncontrollable amount, paired with a reduction in aim assist. We believe the weapon will remain a viable option in high-level gameplay that's going to be less dominant compared to other weapons operating within the same range, especially given the changes to the whole pulse rifle archetype. So reduce the recoil direction stat from 90 to 73, and reduce the aim assist stat from 45 to 40. Finally then, we've got Wrist Runner, and Wrist Runner is a very niche weapon with a very niche strength, but 50% damage resistance in PvP, with the perk active is far out of band from where we would like neutrally triggered damage resistance options to exist. We've reduced it down to 15%, which is still among the highest damage resistance options available, while at the same time making it less of a free win option versus other players who are using arc weapons. So reduce the damage resistance versus players when arc superconductor is active from 50% to 15%. Finally then, we've got future items. So in addition to the items mentioned in last week's TWAB, we wanted to make note of a few more things that we're looking at tuning sometime next season, not necessarily at launch. So special ammo, linear fusion rifles, that's Lawrence Driver and Arbalist, auto aim reduction, flinch tuning, machine gun balancing, making them better heavy option in PvP, reducing the difference between them and other heavy weapons in PvE, and making them less punishing for use for ad clearing, and finally removing the damage penalty to Dead Man's Tail at 5 stacks of Cranial Spike. Well, that is absolutely loads of information there, and let me know in the comments what you think of that weapon tuning. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and for more Destiny 2 content like this, hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to This Week in Video Games. Or you can check me out on Twitter at TWIVG Podcast. Enjoyed this video, found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Well, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.